Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Dr. Kimberly Rae with us, and she's going to share with us climate change in the Arctic. Thank you very much. Dr. Miner, you can go ahead and start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I hope we've got some folks who are joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and start by just going through a presentation and some of the work that I've done and some of the places I've been. But I would be super excited to hear your questions, either through whatever method you are using right now to watch. And whether that's in the chat or on YouTube, feel free to share any of those. So just one moment, I'm going to change to presentation mode. Okay. Can you see that okay, Frankie?
Yes, perfect.
Cool. Okay, like Frankie said, my name is Dr. Kimberly Rae. I am a scientist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, which is also at Caltech, and a research assistant professor at the University of Maine Climate Change Institute. So I've had the opportunity to work on climate change issues from pole to pole. So from the North Pole and Alaska all the way down to the Antarctic. And that's one of the most incredible things about being a field-based climate scientist is I get to go to these amazing places. So this is a picture I took from a helicopter of the Brooks Range in Alaska. I'll have a couple more pictures from this trip, but we were stuck in a tent on a blizzard, or we were stuck in a blizzard, excuse me, in a tent on a glacier during this trip for 8 days. So it was a very long trip, but as you can see, when the clouds clear, it's very beautiful. All right, so this is a picture of me with my dog right outside of the campus at the University of Maine. Her name is Darby, and we like to go hiking and go to the beach and do all sorts of outdoorsy things together. This is a few years ago, so she's much older now, but she's still a great explorer. On the left, you can see me doing some work in the lab. At this particular moment, I was doing something called solid phase extraction. Basically, I am running water through really, really dense filters to try to pick up all the nasties that are in the water, looking specifically for pollutants and pesticides, like some old pesticides called DDT, but pesticides that people are still using on their crops when they grow food, and also something called PFAS, which is kind of like a non-stick coating that's on a bunch of clothes and ends up in the environment. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. So this is in Antarctica. On the left-hand side, it looks a little grainy. I apologize for that, but this is a picture of Rothera, the British base, and they took us skiing. So they took us in this crazy Star Wars-looking cruiser to the top of a glacier, and then we were able to go skiing down it. On the right-hand side, you can see me with some of the crew. We were on a boat, and we sailed from the bottom of Chile all the way to the tip of Antarctica. And so you can see the ocean and some huge icebergs behind us. We saw some icebergs the size of Texas floating out in the water. And this is while we've already been on the boat for quite a while. So you can see we're a little travel weary, but all in very good spirits. All right, in Canada, I worked in Banff National Park. Beautiful, beautiful place. When we're able to travel again, I highly recommend it. These photos are of glacial lakes, and that's like a natural blue hue that comes from the combination of the glacial melt and the type of sediment, and then the reflection of the sky. I've been thinking about water and the reflection of the sky recently because we just moved to California. And I think one of the crazy things to think about is that water isn't actually blue. It's just a reflection of what we perceive to be blue in the sky. So it's actually totally clear or a little bit cloudy with sediment. It's kind of a trippy thing to think about, how things are not always exactly as we perceive. Hey, I also wanted to share, Frankie, that I cannot see any of the chats. So if you want to bust in and ask any questions, if there are any, please feel free to.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, on the right-hand side, the other thing I wanted to point out is you can see in the very back a glacier in this kind of dip in between the two little mountain ranges. And if you look down to where the waterfall is right below that glacier, that whole area used to be covered with a glacier recently. Now, not so recently, we're talking, thousands of years ago, the glacier was all the way up to the front of the picture, and this whole lake was filled in with ice. So as you can see, the glaciers have receded a lot over the history of this mountain range in Banff, but a lot more recently. So they have melted and moved backwards a lot more. This is sampling some of the water in Canada. I'm literally just holding a container to get water, and it's very, 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 very cold. But as you can see from the right-hand side, it's also very, very beautiful. Remember, I was talking about the blue lakes. This is an iconic photo that you can find all over the internet, but this one I actually took right at the top of a very, very steep hill covered with rocks that we had to shimmy down to get to this lake to get samples. And that blue color, again, is because of the combination of the sediment or the tiny rock particles that have come off in the water and the reflection of the sky. So again, a really beautiful place to visit if you get the chance to once we are out of quarantine. So in Alaska, we already talked a little bit about the Brooks Range. This is on the right-hand side. This is that picture that I took, but with a little bit more clarity. This is from a helicopter. Also really fun to ride in helicopters if you get a chance. Climate scientists do a lot of really cool stuff. So it's very cold, as you can see. On the left-hand side, I'm actually standing in a freezer looking at a giant piece of ice called an ice core, and the temperature in the freezer is negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit to make sure that nothing melts. So it's pretty cold. Right above that picture, you can see someone holding the ice core in their hands. So that's what it looks like in the field. And then we have to be really, really careful not to contaminate it. So they're wearing gloves on the outside of their warm gloves. And then we saw it into smaller pieces, put it in really clean bags, and then put them in the freezer for a long term so that we can look at them over time. We don't have to do everything really quickly before it melts. And my background here actually is also in Alaska. We drove down to transfer some of our gear from one site to another, and this was just along the drive. And it's just a beautiful picture from the window of the car. So when we went to the glacier that I was telling you about, this is before the big snowstorm. On the right-hand side, you can see our tents. My tent is on the very left. I was very proud. I dug a deep, deep hole to put my tent in so that it wouldn't get too much wind on it overnight. But unfortunately, because we had a really big snowstorm, it got a lot of snow on it. So I ended up having to share a tent with one of my colleagues who had a tent that wasn't so deeply buried. So we packed up all our gear. On the left-hand side, you can see we put it into an airplane. It took numerous trips, and we even fit a snowmobile in that airplane, which totally blew my mind at the time. I didn't know that was the kind of thing that people did, but you can see on the right-hand side, we successfully got the snowmobile onto the glacier. So we did multiple trips back and forth using this big airplane. I believe this is called a Cessna. There's only 3 that are used in Alaska for this kind of work. So you have to really schedule your trip pretty well. And we had skis and the snowmobile that you can see in the right, all packed up, not to mention all of the gear that we needed to do our sampling. And then there was a blizzard for 8 days. We did the best we could for hanging out in our tents, cooking. We had a cooking tent where we boiled water and made okay food, pretty good food for the middle of a blizzard. And then as soon as we got a little bit of let up from the snow, we were able to use the snowmobile and our skis to go take some samples. This is a close-up of that ice core that I was looking at in the earlier photo. You can see there's some really neat bubbles. And what we're looking for in this case, in the ice core, is these bubbles have a little bit of atmosphere like oxygen, CO2, whatever's in the air when the bubbles form, a tiny bit is trapped. And so it gives climate scientists an understanding of what the atmosphere, what the air around the glacier was like back whenever this was was done. So we have records that go up to 1 million years in ice cores. And it gives us an understanding of how the atmosphere has changed over time, which is one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways we understand more about global warming and what's going on with climate change, because we can see how things have changed over time, over, almost 1 million years of record. This is drilling in ice core and what it looks like. This is obviously a pretty big operation. Remember, this is still on the glacier. So this whole drilling tent, all of the different gear, all of this is on top of a giant, giant frozen ice mound. We call it a stream of ice because it does flow slowly, but it flows very, very slowly. I don't know why I have this in here, but yay, Atlantic sailing. Sailing is really fun. This is a tall ship that usually goes up the coast on the East Coast. So for anyone who's joining us from the East Coast, you can go see these tall ships. And as you can see on the right, you can help crewing the ship and doing what's needed to lift the sails and even maybe sometimes help steer the ship. So there's lots of different ways to explore the ocean. Obviously, taking a bigger ship down to Antarctica, or doing something like this on the coasts of both the Americas and of Europe. All right, so some of the stuff that I have just been working on and just finished up, I was part of a National Geographic expedition that went to Mount Everest. I did not climb Mount Everest. That's the first question everyone always asks, but I have two fantastic grad student partners who did. One of them who went all the way up to the balcony. So if this is the top of Mount Everest, he went right there and took the first ice core from the top of Mount Everest, which was super duper cool. And also snow samples and stream samples. And then we ran it through the filter like I was telling you about and got a good idea of what was inside of them. On the right-hand side, it's shooting a little video for something that I'm part of called the IfThen Fellowship. So we do outreach. It's a bunch of 125 female scientists who do outreach to talk about the kind of science they do and what folks who are younger could potentially do in the future if they were interested in going into STEM, which is science, technology, engineering. Sometimes art is included if you want to do STEAM instead, and math. There's a lot of different ways that people can get involved in those subjects. And this is another part of that IfThen project. They actually made statues of us. So a little known fact is that there are very few statues of women in the United States. It's huge, huge, huge numbers of male statues, but very few of women. So they made a bunch of statues to help even that out. And then on the right, I was just on CBS television show on Saturday morning called Mission Unstoppable with Marina Cosgrove and Fig O'Reilly. And we went kayaking and looked at the ways that the sea level is changing and what that means for all the different plants, animals, and people that live near this place that we were in the Potomac. So that is also available on YouTube if you guys wanted to check that out, along with a ton of really, really cool episodes with all the other scientists, a bunch of DIY videos about how to make all sorts of different things, from lab kits to, I think they've got some neat clouds like for decorating your house. So definitely check that out. That's CBS Mission Unstoppable, and that's on YouTube. This is just a picture of me and Fig. They took this photo of us while we were shooting. So this is a still from the episode. I did just see a question come up. Okay, Mrs. Scott has some questions. Gavin says, what is the biggest, most important thing I have ever done? I guess it depends, Gavin. Everything that I do, I'm trying to show and tell people how important the natural world is and how important it is that we protect it. So whether that's we protect it from pollution, or if it's because of glacier melt, we need to protect it from climate change warming. All of that is all towards the same goal of showing and telling how important it is to protect the earth and the world around us, which I know a lot of you guys already know and you're really on top of. So that's fantastic. Brooklyn is asking why the ice core is so special. What can you do with the ice core sample? So you have to think about the ice core like the oldest library on Earth. So ice cores and tree rings, the inside of a tree, can tell us things that nothing else can, because they basically have recorded all of the dynamics. They've recorded what the Earth has been like over this huge amount of time. And so when we look at an ice core, we can look at, like I was saying, the air. We can look at if there's any chemicals in it. We can look for microbes, like tiny little organisms. So there's so much we can find out about the Earth. But if we're also able to find tiny little organisms in ice cores on Earth, we're thinking, hey, maybe we could find them on other planets too. So ice cores also give us the opportunity to learn new technology so that we can go look for alien life in ice on frozen planets outside of our solar system, or maybe that's even part of our solar system. So let me summarize. We're looking at Earth dynamics, so what the atmosphere and the oceans were like. We're looking for things that live in ice cores, like microbes. And we're also looking for a record of how things have changed over time. And it's really important for us to know, because humans have kind of a short-term memory. We only remember the last few hundred years, when it's really important for us to understand the last few thousand years, so we know how easy it will be to live on our planet for the next couple thousand years, hopefully. Looks like that's it for, nope, we've got some questions in the chat too.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Donna says, what can high schoolers interested in a career as this, such as this, do to get involved early? And do you have book or documentary? Okay, so let's do the, how can you get involved? So I got into STEM kind of late, considering I was really not very good at math. I had a really, really hard time with math, and it made me feel like I couldn't be a scientist. And after my first graduate degree, which was in communicating science, I was told by someone who was a mentor to me that I didn't have to be great at math. I could use all the tools we have now, including programming, methodologies, even something as simple as Excel, and become gradually better the more I practice. So I guess I would say it almost doesn't matter how much time you spend right now doing science-specific things. What really matters is asking questions, having that creativity, having that spark and that passion to find out answers. And then you can develop the skills that you need to pursue your type of science. So if you want to become a neurologist, someone who looks at the brain, for example, no high schooler is going to be able to do that right off the bat. But as you go through learning how to do it, if you have this drive, this thirst for knowledge, the ability to ask hard questions and think, outside of the box, that's going to be the best thing for doing that kind of work. Okay, and as far as documentary and book recommendations, maybe Donna, oh, that was not intended. Maybe Donna, what you could do is tell me a little bit more about what type of book and documentary recommendations you want. Do you want scientists? Do you want types of science, Arctic science? So let me know a little bit more. There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot of great stuff on Netflix. They've got a bunch of new science documentaries starting. So I'm happy to answer that if I can. So let's go back and look at some pretty pictures while we are waiting for more comments. This is what we did last time. We just kind of sat and looked at the pictures until folks came up with more questions. Oh, I've got another question. Okay, any type of book. Okay, Donna. All right, so let's see. So good science books, obviously. Okay, let's start with movies. So obviously Hidden Figures is really important and very, very good movie that talks not only about science, but what it takes to be a scientist and what it took to be a Black scientist in I think it was the 1950s and 60s. There's a new movie on Amazon Prime about, let's see, it's about radiation. Maybe Frankie, you can jump in here. I want to say it's Marie Curie. Well, there's a new movie on Amazon Prime about Do you remember, Frankie?
I do not. I can Google it
Okay, or
and
maybe,
see.
yeah, if you don't mind Googling it, and then maybe some of the folks listening have seen it too. There's a bunch of documentaries on Netflix, um, both BBC documentaries, the awesome nature documentaries, and also like at night. So there's Earth at Night. That's amazing. Most of the creatures are awake at night. Most of the creatures on this planet are nocturnal. So there's a bunch of cool stuff that happens at night, and Netflix has filmed all of it. Marine biology stuff is also something Donna was interested in. So again, I would refer you to Netflix. Sylvia Earle is a wonderful scientist, and she has done a ton of work on deep sea exploration. And I think there's also some James Cameron movies on Netflix about what it's like to go to the very bottom of the ocean. He was the guy who directed Titanic, which is probably a little bit old now, but that's also a really great resource.
Oops, I'm sorry. Is Radioactive the series you were talking about on Amazon Prime?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So thanks, Frankie. That's, I guess, a pretty straightforward name. I probably should have remembered, but I
Just
appreciate that.
I have another question here that was texted to me.
Please.
How do you extract air from a coring?
It's kind of a complicated process. So let me just say that at the University of Maine, we have some lasers, and they do something called laser ablation, which basically they shoot the laser at a bunch of different parts of the core and get an idea of what is in there, looking at the signatures that they pull out. If that person is really interested in getting very specific details, I would be more than happy to have them contact me. I put my website in the chat, so you're welcome to use that contact link. And I'm more than happy to share the methodology on that. But lasers is the long and the short.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. Mrs. Scott's class asks, what is the favorite thing I have studied? Oh, honestly, I really love dolphins, which is really funny since I'm an Arctic scientist. But I really love marine life, and that's been really fun. I do love the way that ice changes the landscape. So if you think about like the heaviest ice blocks going really, really, really slowly, and they take the soil with them, and they can make mountain ranges, they can make valleys. I think that's just phenomenal. One of the best things that I get to do is look at the way that all the different parts of the systems interlink. So how does this glacier affect this mountain? And what does that mean for the trees? And what does that mean for the birds that live in the trees? And what does that mean for the insects that the birds eat? And because I'm a systems scientist, I get to look at how all of those things work together. And it ends up being this really cool, almost like a classroom community of all of these different organisms that have relationships. And I get to look at them and kind of peek beneath the surface and find out more about it. And then the more that we understand those relationships, the better we understand how those relationships relate to us and what that means for our future with living with all these awesome organisms on the planet. All right, Mrs. Scott's class says, have you made any discoveries? You know, I have. Some of them are a little bit of a bummer, so prepare yourself. Some of what I do is a little bit sad. So on both the glacier that's in the picture right now and on Mount Everest, I found out that a lot of the chemicals that we put into the atmosphere, whether it's from making things in factories or it's from spraying pesticides on farms, they end up in the ice and snow, and they are kept there long term. But then because the glaciers are melting, they're re-released back into the water. And then people who live near glaciers might have the unfortunate experience of drinking them or eating them. So it's not right now at the levels where it would hurt anybody. But that was one of the things that I discovered, was that this is going on in a number of different places. And I was also the first person to assess whether or not it would hurt somebody and under what situations it could hurt somebody. And again, remember, all of this work, even though it sounds kind of like a bummer, all of this work is in service to protecting the planet and protecting the people on the planet. So the more we understand about what's going on around us, the easier it is for us to protect things and make sure that we're taking really good care of them. Let's go back to another pretty picture. That one's pretty pretty.
Your pictures are absolutely amazing. And it looks like in your work, you have opportunities to do so many things. You kayak and you're on a boat, a sailboat, and helicopters and planes and camping out in the snow. Of all of those things, what is your favorite thing to do?
Ooh, okay. So remember the picture of us raising the sail on the tall ship in the Atlantic? That's my favorite. I like sailing. I like sailing on big old wooden boats. A lot of the wooden boats are very, very old. They're hundreds of years old. So it's a very special experience that we get to sail on boats either the same or similar as our ancestors did. And that's really, really neat. The Hawaiian Pacific Islanders have this beautiful sailing history, and I was able to sail with them as well. So it's really important to a number of different ancestors all over the world.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And these pictures, are most of them pictures that you have taken?
Yeah, I've taken almost all of them. There were a couple drilling pictures that my advisor at University of Maine, Carl Kreutz, took. He does an awesome job with ice cores as well.
You know, this week or yesterday was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And we had a day full of women scientists and a day full today also of women science. And I just find it incredible that all the scientists that we talk to are so excited to share with the students all over the world. Um, what as we were thinking yesterday, we were thinking about children that are watching. If you were a little 8-year-old Kimberly, what are things that triggered you into the sciences to get to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Frankie. So I'm actually going to pull that into a question from Mrs. Scott's classroom that Owen wanted to know about my favorite marine animal and land animal. And that was what got me excited, was learning about these incredible animals. And I have to say again, I just love dolphins. So my favorite marine animal is probably either the bottlenose or spinner dolphin. And I used to be completely obsessed with them when I was 8 or 9. I had tons of books. I learned all about them. Finally, I was able to see some in real life, IRL, and I think I cried. I was so excited. And my favorite land animal, again, something I do nothing with, would be an elephant, because they are so smart and so loving and so compassionate. And I just am so inspired by elephants. I think they're wonderful. And I'm also really inspired by the people who work so hard to save them and take really good care of them, especially the little orphaned elephants.
Here's another question that was texted to me. Is it true particles on the snow can speed up its melting?
Okay, great question. So specifically, it's the darker carbon, so what we call black carbon. So you guys have seen cars when they drive, sometimes black stuff comes out of the tailpipe. Well, that's true for factories too. So anytime that we burn, it's carbon. So anytime that we burn plant matter or animal matter, like fossil fuels, for example, it releases some of this dark stuff, this black carbon, and that lands on the glaciers, and that does actually speed up the glacier melting process. So you've got a bunch of different ways that glaciers are melting, unfortunately. So you've got warmer temperatures because of climate change. You've got this layer of black carbon on the top, or sometimes other things, including dust or any kind of dark material, including soil or sand. And then also, once there's enough melt on top, some of the glacier on the bottom can melt. And then it almost starts sliding along like an ice cube on a wet surface, still really, really slow, but just a tiny bit faster. And so that's melting from all these different places. And it means that the glaciers are melting way faster than we had hoped, and faster than really is ideal.
Another question. What % of your work is conducting experiments out in the field?
Well, before the pandemic, it was a lot of my work. During my PhD, I spent a ton of time in the field. Probably every couple months, I was going somewhere for some reason. Ideally, after the pandemic, we're going to be able to spend a lot of time in Alaska. I'm part of a project at NASA called the Artic Methane Challenge, and we're looking at the ways that the Arctic is changing and how fast it's changing, which is a lot faster than we thought was going to happen. It's really surprised all sorts of different types of scientists in the last couple of years. So at that point, before the pandemic, I would say, goodness, probably about 40% was going into the field and getting samples. And then once you get the samples, you have to bring them back, process them in the lab, and then you have to write up what you found in this very specific format that people use for scientific journals. It takes a lot of practice to learn how to do that. So that takes a lot of time to learn how to write everything up.
Now, I think you may have mentioned something about this a little bit earlier, but there's a question here that says, how much math does it require to be a climate scientist? I am afraid of math.
Sure. Yeah. So I was really afraid of math too. Like I was talking about, math was really hard for me. Like I could almost not do it. I was so afraid of it. And I had to practice and I had to practice and I had to practice and I had to practice. And I'm a lot better at it now. I'm still not a mathematician, but I'm able to use math in my work. And it does take math to do climate science. Luckily, if you can learn how to use programs like machine learning or like Excel, there's a way to integrate. Once you understand math concepts, then you can use these programs to help you do it faster and make sure you don't make any mistakes. That was the thing. I always made little mistakes that would give me the wrong answer. So you can double check yourself with technology now, which is nice. But it's, you have to know basic things. You have to understand fractions. You have to understand how to do decimal places. You have to understand regular log division, stuff like that. So that stuff is important, and that stuff is important for everything. It's even important to be able to pay your bills as an adult, unfortunately. So I would encourage everyone to stick with it, keep practicing. I don't know why math is so scary, but it just feels really scary. So if you can just be brave and just keep doing it anyway and make that the thing that you're brave about right now. That bravery is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it will get. So this is a good time to practice being brave, even if it feels silly to have to be brave about math. I'm right there with you.
Another question. How often do you use patterns to identify climate change? Patterns is one of our cross-cutting concepts in science.
Ooh, great. Okay. Pattern recognition, I think, is basically my entire life. I use pattern recognition in my work. I use pattern recognition in my home life. And I think that if you guys think about it, you really do too. If you get home one day and the adult who takes care of you is acting in a weird way, then that's a pattern recognition. You know a pattern in their behavior, and then you see a difference. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for over time, what are the different patterns that either the trees are different or the air is different? And what does that mean for, what's the meaning of that? What's the content that you can pull out from that? So patterns are actually one of the coolest things, I think, that I do. There's a little bit of math in patterns, but it's hidden, so it's not very scary. A little bit of, addition and subtraction and division and multiplication. But anytime that I have the opportunity to look for patterns, that's where you can find some of the best answers to science problems.
And then does that often lead to cause and effect?
Yeah, you can derive cause and effect from patterns, I think, as long as you have enough information. So as long as you have a huge number of patterns in your I don't know how to say it otherwise, in your data set, you have a lot of patterns to look at, then you can understand, okay, what caused this type of patterns and what changed it? And then, what does that mean for the future? And that basically is climate science, looking at the way things were, looking at how they're changing, and trying to hypothesize what that means for the future. You totally got it, Frankie. That's it.
Here's the next question. It says, is it hard to study systems? I would think you would have to know about so many different things.
Yeah, so system science is basically pattern recognition. You really got it on the last question. So looking at a system is basically looking at patterns in all these different places. How do birds normally act? How do trees normally grow? How fast do they normally grow? How do the tree and the bird interact with each other? And it's really cool because it gives you the chance to be really, really creative. So you get to think about all the different things that could be happening and then start working out whether or not that's true or not. So you make a hypothesis about all the different things that are happening, all the patterns and how they impact each other. And then you use data to figure out whether or not your hypothesis is correct.
Next question from the YouTube is, do you have a favorite expedition story?
Well, the expedition story I think I tell the most is about the glacier snow event, which I've talked a little bit about, but that was in Alaska. Let me see if I can get quickly back to the photos. That was in Alaska, and we got stuck on this glacier for 8 days, and the winds were up to 90 miles per hour. So they were pushing the tents over. We had to actually abandon one tent and dig it out later because we had 3 feet of snow, so it was a huge amount of snow. And that covered the tents. We had to dig all day and all night to keep our tents from being covered in snow, just to have the energy to get up in the morning because it was so cold. I had to eat an entire Snickers bar. So I would sit in my sleeping bag and eat a Snickers bar. And then I would suddenly feel warm enough because of all the chocolate and all the calories to be able to crawl out of my tent and, go through the snow and the wind to go to our food tent. So that was a very extreme experience. Luckily, our field leader, who's another professor at the University of Maine, Seth Campbell, he was able to keep all of us alive and healthy and happy. And I told some funny jokes that, maybe were funny, maybe not funny. And we played a little bit of categories. So we got through it. But tell you what, I was really glad when the snow stopped.
Wow. Seems like it could be a little scary as well.
Oh, it was definitely scary. Luckily, our team was very strong. So we were able to, like I said, be brave and practice being brave. But it's important in that kind of situation to, stay vigilant and make sure you're doing everything you can to keep yourself dry and warm. Dry and warm is kind of the most important thing in Arctic or polar science. So that was what we really focused on.
I like that mantra too, practice being brave.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next question that was emailed to me. You have worked at so many really prestigious organizations and agencies. Do you have a favorite organization you worked for?
This is going to sound a little silly since I'm still there, but I really like NASA and the University of Maine. The people at the University of Maine are phenomenal. Everyone is so focused on outdoor exploration, so it was a perfect fit for me. And I love working at NASA. NASA is so exciting, as I'm sure all of you know. So many smart people are working there and do so many cool things. Right now, we've got the Mars Perseverance, which is just about to land on Mars on the 18th. And I'm not part of that project, but a lot of incredible people are. So both of those places are really, really cool to work. And I'm really, really delighted that I get to still work at both of those.
Okay. Is it true that the Earth's climate has always been changing?
Yeah. So my mom used to say when I was little, and it's still true, that the only constant in life is change. That is exactly true. The difference and the thing that we are worried about is how fast it's changing. So humans, we're very sweet, kind of fragile organisms. We don't have feathers, we don't have shells, we don't have spines. we need the temperatures to stay in the certain range, and we need food and water just to be available for us. And so the concern is that things are changing so fast now, that the temperatures are changing really fast, and the summer temperatures are going way up. And it's going to change the way that food and water is available. So even though the Earth has always changed, the climate has always changed, we have to try to help the Earth system stay in a range that humans can live at. Because it would be a bummer if, we had such a big climate change event that humans really had to struggle. And that's what we're talking about, and that's what I'm trying to prevent with my work.
Very nice. Have you helped develop or provided evidence that was used for policy or law?
Oh, I am not yet sure about that. So at Columbia University, our group did work for a group that was a policy, one of our teams worked for a group that was a policy organization. And I know they presented their results to Congress about pollution and the way that it impacts communities of color in the New York region, so environmental justice issues. And hopefully what we found on Mount Everest with the gear, the waterproofing coating on the gear will be considered. And maybe they'll even be able to start working on solutions and banning some of the chemicals that we found all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have one more question that was texted to me. Is there a scientist that you look up to?
There's lots. Recently, I was thinking about Katherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist who really paved the way for a lot of us younger women in climate science. The same is true of Sylvia Earle, who is more focused on the marine ecosystem, but her work has been phenomenal, and she did very groundbreaking work for her time. Obviously, a lot of the NASA women scientists, a lot of what they called the NASA computers, if you watch Hidden Figures. So yes. Women who just did math all day and they did really, really hard math, and they just sat there and did it all day and did an amazing job. And NASA does have a legacy of really, really impressive scientists, both male and female, who identify as both male and female. So I would definitely encourage people to check out our websites as well. And you can see the beautiful legacy of innovation and creativity that scientists from NASA have had.
Anyone else have any questions that you can put in the Q&A or the chat? We've had some awesome questions.
Yeah, and I definitely want to shout out to Mrs. Scott's class. Thank you so much for your great questions. Also to Donna Mata. I'm not sure if that was a classroom, but you guys have had great questions. So if you have any more, more than happy to answer them.
Let's see.
I guess I have a question if people are interested in responding. I am curious, what is the thing that you are most concerned about or have the biggest questions about with climate change? Donna Mata says, is there a way for teens to be part of National Geographic? Oh, I don't know. There might be a Teen Explorer program. So National Geographic has two arms right now. National Geographic Society is like the research side. And then National Geographic, which I believe is affiliated with Disney, has a little bit more of the production side where the videos are made. They actually have on Disney Plus, they have a video about our expedition, our Everest expedition. I am not in it, but my grad student friend, Heather Clifford, is in it. So that's also a really cool thing to check out on Disney Plus, is the Everest expedition from National Geographic.
You mentioned earlier that your work has been impacted. How much has it been impacted by COVID?
I mean, a huge amount. I can't travel. so we can't go into the field. I can't go on to lab because it's really important that all the Mars people be able to go onto the lab. So people like me who don't have these critical things happening right now in the lab can't go. So I basically am writing up results almost full time. We've got, I think, 4 papers that came out last year, and hopefully we're going to have 3 or 4 this year. But at some point, we're going to have to go out and get some new data. So, it was scientists who were able to make this vaccine happen so quickly.
Yes.
So it's, just another tip of the hat to them, another thank you to them that we could
Absolutely.
potentially go out in 2021.
Right. And for teachers, we're all anxious to get everyone back in the classroom too.
Yeah, and teachers have done such a phenomenal job in the last, they always do an incredible job, but in the last year and a half, even more so. So if folks are listening and you're sitting with your teacher, it'd be an awesome time to take a moment to thank them because they have gone above and beyond in everything they do.
Yes. Are there teachers had to learn an incredible amount of new technology and things like that as they went through this pandemic? Have you had to learn new technologies and things? Did it impact you in that way where you learned a lot more on how to use technology that you weren't using before?
Maybe not so much for my work because I have been doing so much writing, but I have learned a lot about epidemiology, about the study of diseases and the study of viruses since then. Being a scientist means you're always learning. So I'm always reading new stuff that comes out from new papers that come out from all of my colleagues all over the world. And that teaches me new things. But I've learned a lot more about viruses than I ever knew, and a lot more about mRNA vaccines than I ever knew. And also a lot more about what everyone does at work, how teachers work and how people in the grocery store work. And so I've learned a lot, yeah.
One more question here. I imagine you have to keep physically fit for this type of work. So
that's been another problem with the pandemic is like I'm sure all of you, I've spent a lot of time in my own home. And so I have not been as physically fit as I need to be. So once this is over, I'm going to have to start working out all the time. I have to start going for jogs and riding my bike and getting back up to hiking speed. Because in order to be safe in the outdoors, you have to be pretty physically fit or at least able to do what you are signing yourself up to do. So if you go on an easy hike, you have to be able to do that. But if you go on a hard hike, you also have to be able to conquer the hard hike.
is it difficult to adjust to the altitudes?
It didn't used to be for me. I was born in Boulder, Colorado, which is a mile above sea level. But recently it has been. I guess that's part of getting older is your body starts changing. And so
Yes,
that's
it does.
been happening.
Okay, a couple more questions have come in. How many layers did you have to wear on the glacier? What kind of gear did you have to bring with you in order to protect you from the cold?
So on my website, which again, I think I put in the chat, but it's drkimberlyrae.com. I actually have a video that we took for the local news of me putting on layers for a snowstorm. So it's a very silly video if you guys are interested. So you'd start with a thermal, which is basically what I'm wearing here. So just a very thin moisture whisking layer. So it takes the moisture and doesn't make you cold. And then you'd either have 1 or 2 insulating layers, and then you'd have a coat and then potentially a top waterproof layer. And that's just for your top part of your body. So remember, you have to wear hats, and sometimes you can wear thermals that are moisture whisking, and then maybe like a wool hat on top of that. And then the same thing on your bottoms and your boots. You have to wear at least 1 pair of socks, sometimes 2, sometimes even 3 pairs of socks. So it's a pretty big operation. It's like when you guys who are in snow areas go play in the snow. So Donna Mata has just asked, are you outfitted by the people funding the expedition? It kind of depends. So Antarctica, the National Science Foundation that runs the US Antarctic program, has a storeroom full of this like very, very technical, very fancy, heavy duty gear. And the point of it is if you accidentally fall in this freezing ocean, you will not die. You'll have time to get saved. So it's very, very heavy duty waterproof gear. And that is loaned to you for the expedition. Sometimes the grants provide money for outfits. Sometimes if you're using it for your own personal use, like if you go climbing on your days off, then you just buy your own gear. So it kind of depends on how technical it needs to be. The more technical gear is, sometimes the more expensive it is. So that's usually where a university or a grant will step in and help pay for it.
Are those skis sticking out there too, of the sticking out in the snow? So
yeah, those are cross-country skis. So those cross-country skis, I believe those were also outfitted from the National Science Foundation. They have an outfitter in Alaska as well. So they gave us all the tents, they gave us the skis, everything that's not personal gear, right? So this thermal, this is my personal gear, but a tent would be something that we would get once we arrive in Alaska. And that means that we don't have to fly on a commercial airliner with, this huge amount of gear.
mhm. Let's see. Any more questions?
Well, thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you so much for all of these awesome questions. I do really encourage you, again, to go check out the National Geographic channel on Disney+. We've got the Everest expedition video there. I think there's some other really amazing content. And then on, like I said, on Netflix and on, on Netflix, there's the night, the Earth at Night, and then some of the BBC series about the Earth are on there too. So while you guys are doing an awesome job either staying at home or being safe in your classrooms, there's tons of ways for you to learn, whether it's online or on the television or reading books.
Well, I want to thank you very much for this. This has been awesome. And we so appreciate you coming here and talking with us today and sharing your path and what you've learned about.
Absolutely.
Thank you
It's
very
been my
much.
pleasure.
Have a good afternoon. Goodbye, everybody. We hope you'll join us for our next in our series. Thank you.